Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. The Montreal weekend is about to begin, and after the blowout that Charles Leclerc suffered in Azerbaijan, it seems he may well be onto his third power unit here in Montreal and also his fourth turbo. By taking a fourth turbo, a fourth part of the engine, it means that he will incur a 10-place grid penalty this weekend if this goes ahead as is presently rumoured. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, plenty to discuss. Yesterday there was a crazy storm actually going on in Montreal. You can see what the pit lane looked like, so we'll see if this continues, because Saturday is meant to be potentially wet qualifying. We'll see how it goes. Of course, I wanted to talk also about the big announcement of yesterday, which is that the FIA have taken steps, seemingly, to, well, prevent the porpoising issue. Now, whether any of this actually comes to fruition, because it will to some degree, but whether it happens already is certainly another question that the teams are wondering about right now, because effectively this is, as Toby Gruner points out right here, the details such that new porpoising limits will be set before FP3 so that the cars don't bounce around too much, and if they do, if they, well, can't supply a setup deemed to be safe, they will have to raise the ride height by 10mm. If they can't do that and it doesn't fix the issue, then they will be disqualified if still above the limits of the porpoising thresholding. Now, of course, like, this is a more complicated issue than maybe is being seen here on the surface, and it must be said the likes of George Russell, Carlos Sainz, that pushed for this rather heavily after Baku, and now are potentially kind of, well, not necessarily regretting the situation, but those two teams might suffer more than most. Let's just say Red Bull are probably loving life right now. Now, Gasly says also a great thing that the FIA have responded so positively and so quickly. Certainly a good idea to make sure the health of the drivers is prioritised, but at the end of the day, is this actually going to come into effect this weekend? Can the teams agree on what this means? Can they agree on like an acceptable porpoising limit? Can they differentiate between porpoising aerodynamically and mechanical bouncing, like despite them looking the same? That's another big question these teams are going to have to deal with, right? But Gasly is obviously thinking it's a pretty good thing. Verstappen actually said something rather interesting. I'm sure it doesn't really matter for him too much because he's top of the championship, so are Red Bull, of course, in the constructors. But he says actually, effectively, he doesn't think it's right that this technical directive could impact the pecking order mid-season. He doesn't actually think this should have happened, but at the end of the day, I'm sure like if it was on the other end of the spectrum and the Red Bull were the guys potentially suffering from this, then maybe he would have a different opinion. But in the nice comfortable position that he finds himself in, I'm sure, well, it doesn't really matter too much either way. Now, Mercedes potentially, as Albert Fabrega points out right here, like already looking like they're kind of configuring a low downforce rear wing, which might mean they're kind of planning for raising the ride height already, because I mean they already said after Baku that like they pushed it too far in terms of they pushed their drivers too far, they have the car too low, they can't afford to do that going forward. So they're probably going to raise the ride height anyway. Whether they will be forced to by the FIA due to the bouncing, like we'll see after practice today and tomorrow how that goes. Then the FIA apparently are going to come up with a number that says, okay, if you're bouncing up and down more than this amount, and I'm pretty sure that's in terms of amplitude, because Red Bull also do have some porpoising, but it's rather low amplitude, as in like it doesn't move up and down that much, but it's high frequency, and I think it also gets worse for them as the race progresses. So like depending on the fuel loads, because Ferrari, I believe they have worse porpoising in the higher fuel loads and then it gets better. Red Bull is the other way around, so teams might be kind of managing or changing up their fuel load to say, okay, well, our porpoising's better at this fuel load, therefore we can kind of get around what the FIA is saying. So it's going to cause an absolute mess, to be honest. But I mean, yeah, apparently Mercedes are going to run a slightly new floor with added slots to the edges. They also had a second stay. We saw Red Bull add one this past weekend. Now, they also say that due to the way their flooring is designed, or their suspension is designed, that at some point they actually can't raise it any higher. So I wonder what would happen there in a kind of a crazy world where they keep raising their flooring, reducing the kind of downforce they get in the corners, but reducing the impact of the bouncing as well, and then they still can't get to the levels that if I want them to get to, like at that point, if they simply can't raise it any further, would they be disqualified from the races? I kind of doubt that's going to happen, but you can't rule it out based on the way the rules are currently being described. But this is a kind of Tammy points out here. It's an interesting question, really. It's possible the values determined by like after the practice sessions, like it might not be too easy to actually come to a conclusion. Like what value is an acceptable level of porpoising? Does the FIA really know? Like is this weekend going to be quick enough to be able to make that happen? And that's of course the other question, because there could be a legal perspective where the technical directive refers to aerodynamically generated bouncing called porpoising, but most teams actually have this under control now on the flat tracks. Mercedes had the lowest porpoising in Spain in the entire grid, right? They fixed it with a kind of their new flooring, but it's the bouncing issue, the kind of mechanically related bouncing issue, which looks the same but is different, right? But of course causes the same effect for the drivers. So to be honest, it's an absolute mess, and we really have no idea how it's going to play out, whether like what the FIA are going to come up with, what they're going to say in terms of which teams are allowed. Like, okay, do these teams have to raise their ride height? We'll see what they come up with, right? But I mean, it's probably going to favour Red Bull more than others because they probably don't have to worry that much about this, right? And maybe it'll make the cars in the grid generally just slower across the board. But if it's to the benefit of the drivers, then it can't really be a bad thing, right? And there also has been some theories that potentially teams might be allowed to bring further aerodynamic upgrades to control the porpoising as time progresses. So we'll see how that one goes. goes. But let's talk about Ferrari. We'll talk about this. So, of course, the engine arrived, their power unit 2 that he had in Baku, that exploded. That's not good anymore. The entire engine was destroyed. Therefore, he's going to have to go on to his 3rd power unit. And there were some rumours that he might still try and use the first turbo that he used at the first part of the season. I think they've probably realised, okay, that turbo might not last, or it's not going to provide the right power. We're just going to have to go to another turbo. So, as Giuliano De Chiesto initially points out, 3rd power unit, 4th turbocharger this weekend, and as is described here in English. The 4th turbo, of course, being the key deal, but even the 3rd power unit here is a massive deal as well, just because, like, we heard the rumours a little bit ago that Ferrari were planning to potentially go to 5 or 6 power units this season, take a few grid penalties, but try and do a Hamilton at the end of last season, effectively with the more powerful engine, if it actually makes it the distance of the race, which the Mercedes engine, of course, generally does do. But by taking a 4th turbocharger beyond kind of what is allowed, particularly in the regulations, by taking another part of the engine, I'm pretty sure if it still works how it did last year, if you take an entirely new engine, or like if everything is new in the power unit, I'm pretty sure you go to the back of the grids. But if it's like you take a new part of the engine, like Mercedes last year would take a few new internal combustion engines specifically within the powertrain, then that's only a 10-place grid penalty initially, and then every penalty after this, I believe, will only be a 5-place grid penalty. So I guess they're thinking, look, let's just get this out of the way now, because a 5 place isn't actually too bad. You can overturn that. 10 place is pretty tough. It's possible to overcome, and it will probably make the race this weekend rather interesting, right? But it does mean that it puts Ferrari already further on the back foot than they already were, because Leclerc has been incredibly good so far this season, putting on pole. But if he goes P1 down to P11 and then has to fight his way through the field, how far up can he realistically get over the course of the race? Probably a fair distance. It's going to make the race probably rather entertaining, but yeah, not good for Ferrari or Charles Leclerc at all, because this is qualifying positions. He's qualified P1 at the last 4 races now in a row. You wouldn't be surprised at all if he repeats that this weekend here in Montreal. He wants to qualify as high as he possibly can, but the kind of, let's go he does is probably not going to have quite the same energy if he does stick it on pole, because, well, he'll be starting with another 1 behind the P1 right here. So yes, far from ideal for Charles Leclerc. If this does go through, it does seem like it's going to be the case. Certainly further engine penalties are going to have to be taken. They probably realise, okay, we might as well just take this one now, get it out the way, and try and see what they can do in the car this weekend. But yeah, it's going to be difficult to get past Red Bull and Max Verstappen if they're right there or thereabouts with the Ferraris in qualifying, and then of course their reliability as well, at least after the first couple of races, has been way better than Ferraris have. And I want to talk about Haas as well, because a rather big deal here. It's kind of unfortunate in a way. Haas started the season so promisingly. In Bahrain, of course, they were looking really good in the kind of testing, and then the first couple of rounds as well, it was actually looking really good for them. And then it wasn't long after that, things have very much fallen back through the pack. And yeah, as of late, of course, Schumacher's had a fair few crashes as well. Mick Schumacher, which certainly hasn't helped their budget, because apparently they're realistically only going to have 1 upgrade package this season, which is just pretty sad to see, to be honest. But largely it's probably caused by the fact that the damages that they've incurred by some of these Mick Schumacher crashes have not helped them at all, right? So apparently they were going to plan this upgrade package for the French Grand Prix. Now it's going to be 1 week later in Hungary, which I believe the Grand Prix is on the weekend of effectively the last weekend of July. That's when they're planning changes. Until then, practically nothing is going to happen. They're delaying it for quite some time, and after that, their focus fully shifts to next year's car. So all the kind of a couple of years of development they've had for this new Haas car came out at the start of the season pretty much better refined, let's say, than other teams. Looked pretty good early on. Other teams have quickly overtaken, and Haas just don't have the budget to come anywhere near them, to be honest. So it's kind of unfortunate. And even Günther Steiner says, because there has been some rumours that, Mick Schumacher might not be in that car next season. And as he says, I'm not going to be the scapegoat for the fact that things haven't gone as planned for Mick this year. Effectively putting the blame on him. That he has no points is a fact. The 2 accidents too, that is a fact. That he's crashed it. There's a complete nonsense that we put Mick as a disadvantage or under any unnecessary pressure, saying that it's not our fault that Mick's underperforming. It's Mick himself, right? So we'll see if he can get points. It's going to be tough for him. But of course, as the car continues to go backwards through the field as well, and they're like Aston Martin improving, all this type of stuff as well. They believe actually that they're bouncing. Vettel said is actually much better than it was before. Their kind of B-spec car, the one that looks remarkably similar to the Red Bull, is interestingly enough much better on the kind of porpoising bouncing front than their first version of the car was, right? Which does go to show something about that Red Bull design, which maybe a lot of other teams might consider while implementing it going forwards into next year. Kind of crazy just this to look back on, right? The last time F1 raced in Canada back in 2019, Gasly was still in the Red Bull. Verstappen hadn't even scored a pole position yet. Rich Energy was sponsoring the Haas guys. I think even Grosjean was in the car at the time, and Alpha Tauri was still known as Toro Rosso, right? It just does show how long ago, I suppose, that seems to be to some degree. Just to mention this as well, the title battle as it is shaping up right now, the top 4 title contenders, George Russell, of course, picking up points every single race so far, P5 or better every single race this season. He's been chugging along, but still, the highs aren't quite as high as Verstappen has been, Perez has been in Monaco, and Charles Leclerc, after a fantastic start, definitely those 2 DNFs in a row have put him in a very challenging position indeed. And George Russell, honestly, is closing in rather quickly. And just to mention this, I thought was rather interesting because Charles Leclerc is still probably favourite for pole this weekend, but of course he won't actually be starting on number 1 on the grid, as we just looked at. But in street circuits, Verstappen has actually never scored a pole position, which is kind of remarkable. So yeah, Montreal 0, a lot of these other street circuits, Verstappen's never been on pole there, right? So we'll see if he can kind of buck that trend this weekend, but he'll probably win the race regardless. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.